The numbers glowed on the screen, a neat, orderly testament to discipline. Each cell in the spreadsheet was a small victory, a dollar saved, a step taken. I spun my laptop around on the polished granite of our kitchen island, my excitement a tangible thing, a low hum beneath my ribs. Cora, look, I said, my voice brimming with a pride I couldn't contain. Just 6 more months. At this rate, we can make the first payment for the house on Cedar Lake. I had spent hours perfecting the chart, a mosaic of color-coded projections and meticulous calculations. Every dollar was accounted for, every projection calculated to the penny. The lakefront property we had toured last summer, the one with the sprawling oak tree and the rickety old dock, was finally, truly within our grasp. It was more than a house. It was the physical manifestation of the secure future I had sworn to build, a fortress against the financial insecurity that had haunted my childhood. Cordelia glanced up from her phone, her eyes, the color of warm whiskey, barely registering the screen. Yes, great, honey, she mumbled, her thumb continuing its effortless scroll through an endless feed of curated lives on Instagram. Then, she perked up, a sudden spark animating her features. It was the same spark that had captivated me at a charity gala 9 years ago. By the way, she said, her voice bright with an enthusiasm she hadn't shown for my chart. I booked us a trip to Aspen for next weekend. Just for 3 days. All my girlfriends will be there. I slowly closed the laptop. The soft, final click of the lid seemed to echo in the cavernous silence of our Manhattan apartment, louder than a slammed door. The glowing numbers vanished. Cora, we can't, I said, my voice tight. That trip, it will cost as much as 2 months of our savings. The plan? She rolled her eyes, a gesture of dramatic exasperation she had perfected over the years. Oh, Leland, you're so boring. You only live once. It's all paid for anyway. I used the credit card. My stomach dropped, a leaden weight plummeting through me. You paid with our joint credit card. Don't worry, she said, waving a dismissive hand, her collection of gold bracelets chiming softly. We'll pay it off. Somehow. Somehow. That one word summed up the fundamental chasm that had opened between us. I lived by a plan, she lived by somehow. I had met her when I was 30 and she was 27. I was already establishing myself at Blackstone Capital, methodically climbing the corporate ladder, rung by calculated rung. She was a vibrant interior designer, a whirlwind of creativity whose clients included minor celebrities and one major real estate developer, her father. She wore a red dress that night, a slash of crimson in a sea of black and white, and every man in the room did a double take. But it was her laugh that had snared me. It was uninhibited and genuine in a room full of practiced social smiles. You're the only man here who hasn't tried to look down my dress, she'd said when I finally worked up the courage to introduce myself. I'm more interested in what's behind your eyes, I'd replied, a line that sounded smoother than I'd intended. She'd laughed again. Careful, I might actually believe you. We talked for hours that night, standing in a corner of the ballroom long after the auction had ended. She was refreshingly direct, cutting through the usual social pretenses with a candor I found intoxicating. Our first date was 3 days later, at a small Italian restaurant where we shared a bottle of Barolo and our 5-year plans. I want to start my own design firm, she told me, her eyes bright with determination. No more executing other people's visions. I want to create spaces that reflect who I am as an artist. What about you? She'd asked. What's your 5-year plan? Managing director by 35, I'd said without hesitation. My own investment fund by 40. The path had been clear to me for years. She raised her glass. To knowing exactly what we want. We were inseparable after that night. 6 months in, during a weekend trip to the Berkshires, I proposed on a hiking trail overlooking a valley ablaze with fall colors. I hadn't planned it for that moment, but something about her, windblown and laughing, made me reach for the ring in my pocket. I know it's fast, I'd said, kneeling on the rocky ground. But when you know, you know. She hadn't hesitated. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Our wedding, 11 months after we met, was a lavish affair at the New York Public Library that cost more than my first year's salary. Her father, a man whose perpetual scowl deepened whenever he looked at my middle-class background, footed most of the bill. Consider it my investment in my daughter's happiness, he'd grumbled, though God knows what she sees in you. Cora had defended me fiercely then. Leland is brilliant with money, Daddy. He actually works for a living. I appreciated the sentiment, but noted the emphasis on my financial potential. It should have been a warning sign, but I was too in love to see it. The first few years were good. My methodical approach balanced her spontaneity. Her creativity softened my rigid adherence to plans, or so I thought. The cracks began to show around year 5. Disagreements about spending, arguments about priorities. I suggested a budget. She called it a financial straitjacket. I set up automatic transfers to our savings. She made unplanned withdrawals for opportunities too good to pass up. You act like we're one paycheck away from poverty, she'd complained after I questioned a $3,000 purchase of a vintage credenza. And you act like money is an infinite resource, I'd countered. We need a plan if we want security. If I wanted to marry an accountant, I would have, she'd snapped. Your obsession with saving is sucking all the joy out of our life. The fight over the Aspen trip felt different. It wasn't just about money, it was a referendum on our shared future. The lake house was the one dream I thought we were truly aligned on. For once, we seemed to want the same thing. Now, she was ready to blow 2 months of progress on a whim. She grabbed her designer purse, the one that had cost more than my first car, and headed for the door. I'm flying out Friday morning. If you don't want to come, that's your problem. I'll be back Sunday evening. She paused at the threshold, tossing the words over her shoulder like discarded trash. Don't wait up. The door closed. And in the profound silence that followed, something crystallized in my mind with perfect, chilling clarity. We were moving in opposite directions. I was building our future while she was systematically demolishing it, one impulsive purchase at a time. I wouldn't wait up. I would get up, and I would get out. That night, I moved with the swift, dispassionate efficiency of a trader cutting a bad investment. There was no rage, no shouting, just a cold, hard sense of purpose. Within 2 hours, I had packed 3 suitcases with everything that truly mattered to me. My clothes, my books, the framed photo of my mother, and the files for the Cedar Lake house. I opened my laptop, the same one I had shown Cora with such hope just hours before. I transferred exactly half of our joint savings, $137,892, 43 to a private account she couldn't access. I called the credit card company, reported our joint card stolen, and requested a new one in my name only. The final act was the quietest. I walked into our bedroom, the air still faintly scented with her expensive perfume, and placed my wedding ring on her jewelry tray next to a collection of Tiffany bracelets. Then I walked out. By midnight, I was checked into a downtown hotel. By 6 a.m., I had emailed my lawyer to begin divorce proceedings. By 9 a.m., I had blocked Cordelia's number after the 15th hysterical voicemail demanding to know where I was and what I'd done with our money. The divorce was as brutal as I'd expected. Her father hired Gerald Hoffman, a lawyer notorious for his scorched earth tactics. They painted me as controlling, financially abusive, and emotionally unavailable. They demanded alimony, audited my finances, and accused me of hiding assets. Cora's emails vacillated between tearful pleading and vicious threats. "You've humiliated me in front of everyone," she wrote. "My credit card was declined at Bergdorf's. Is that what you wanted? My father says you won't get away with this. We're going to take everything." I didn't respond. I channeled my anger and hurt into the one thing I could control: my work. I put in longer hours than ever, burying myself in market analyses and client portfolios. 3 months into the proceedings, Preston Shaw, the head of my division, called me into his office. He was a formidable man in his late 50s with a reputation for being tough but fair. "Leland," he said without preamble, his sharp eyes assessing me over his half-moon glasses, "you've been doing the work of 3 analysts, but you look like hell." "I'm going through a divorce?" I said simply. Preston nodded, a flicker of understanding in his gaze. "I heard. Nasty business. Been there myself. First wife left me for her yoga instructor." He shook his head at the memory. "Best thing that ever happened to me, though I couldn't see it at the time. Led me to Elizabeth. 20 years and counting." He slid a folder across his polished mahogany desk. "The managing director position we discussed last year. It's yours if you want it. The partners voted yesterday." I blinked, momentarily forgetting about Hoffman, Cora, and the divorce. "Thank you, sir. Of course I want it. Here's the compensation package," he said. I opened the folder. The base salary alone was nearly double my current compensation. The bonus potential was staggering. As I stood to leave, Preston added one more thing. "That lake house you mentioned a while back," he said, surprising me that he'd remembered a casual conversation from months ago. "The one in the Adirondacks. Might be time to pull the trigger on that." Nothing settles a man after a divorce like a good investment property. He winked. Trust me on that. As I walked out of his office, the folder heavy in my hand, a plan began to form. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. It was about taking the dream that had been shattered and building it from the ashes, for myself. The divorce finalized 6 months after I walked out. Cora, it turned out, had been having an affair with a younger designer at her firm, funding his lifestyle with the unplanned withdrawals from our account. The revelation was the final piece of the puzzle, and it made the settlement cleaner. She kept her business. I kept my investments and the bulk of our savings. The day the divorce was finalized, I called a real estate agent in upstate New York. The Cedar Lake house was still on the market. I made an offer, slightly below asking price. With a quick, all-cash closing, it was accepted within hours. The first time I drove up to Cedar Lake, as the sole owner of the property, felt surreal. The late autumn air was crisp, and the winding road was lined with trees that had shed their fiery colors, their bare branches stark against a pale blue sky. The house looked just as I remembered it, a rambling four-bedroom structure, perched on a gentle rise, its paint peeling slightly, its potential undeniable. But this time, I wasn't seeing it through a filter of shared dreams. I was seeing it for what it was, a project, my project. The renovation became my therapy. Every weekend, I drive up from the city, trading my suit for work boots and my spreadsheets for blueprints. The house needed more work than I'd initially estimated. The roof leaked, the dock was a collection of rotting planks, and the electrical system was a fire hazard waiting to happen. But the bones were good, and the location was everything I had dreamed of. I approached the renovation the way I approached my investment portfolios, with careful planning, strategic allocation of resources, and a clear vision of the desired outcome. I hired local contractors, good people who took pride in their work, and I oversaw every detail. There was a deep, visceral satisfaction in the transformation. Watching a rotted support beam being replaced with solid new timber felt like reinforcing my own spine. Tearing down interior walls to create a great room with a wall of windows facing the lake felt like letting light and air into my own suffocated life. I didn't hire an interior designer. The thought of bringing another one into my life was unappealing, but mostly, I wanted the house to reflect my tastes alone. This was my declaration of independence from Cora's world of fleeting trends and statement pieces. There would be no excess of throw pillows, no abstract art selected for its conversational value, no $1,000 lamps. Instead, I chose natural materials, warm woods, cool slate, and worn leather. The great room was transformed with a massive stone fireplace at one end and the wall of windows at the other. The kitchen was gutted and rebuilt with professional-grade appliances and clean, functional cabinetry. The master suite was reconfigured to include a private deck overlooking the water. As the months passed, the house began to feel less like a project and more like a home. My home. Each completed task was a small act of healing, of overwriting the past. The scent of sawdust and fresh paint replaced the ghost of Cora's perfume. The solid thud of a hammer replaced the echo of slammed doors. I was building something real, something lasting, something that was entirely, unequivocally mine. Almost exactly 1 year after I'd walked out of my old life, the renovation was nearly complete. I was at the lake house for a long weekend, standing at the end of the newly reconstructed dock, a mug of coffee warming my hands. The sun was just beginning to crest the line of pine trees across the lake, painting the still water in shades of rose and gold. The air was silent, save for the distant call of a loon. It was a perfect, profound peace. "You must be the new owner." The voice came from behind me, startling me out of my reverie. I turned to find a woman standing on the shore path, a golden retriever sitting obediently at her feet. She was casually dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore no makeup that I could discern, and her smile was open and genuine. "The place looks amazing," she added. "Thanks," I said, walking back towards the shore. "I'm Leland Harrington." Audrey Nichols. She extended a hand, and her handshake was firm. "I own the property around the bend. Well, technically the bank owns most of it, but I'm working on changing that." Her directness was refreshing. "Nice to meet you, Audrey. And who's this?" I gestured to the dog. "This is Winston," she said, scratching him behind the ears. "Best roommate I've ever had. Doesn't eat my food, doesn't hog the remote, always happy to see me." I laughed, surprised at how natural it felt. "Sounds like the perfect relationship." "Pretty close," she agreed. "Anyway, I just wanted to introduce myself. We're neighbors, sort of. I've watched the renovation from afar. It's impressive what you've done. Would you like a tour? The offer surprised me, as much as it seemed to surprise her. I wouldn't want to impose. Not at all. I was just about to make more coffee. Oh. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Sure, why not? Winston and I were just on our morning walk anyway. I led her up to the house, suddenly seeing it through her eyes. The new cedar siding gleamed in the morning light. This is beautiful, she said as we entered the great room. So open and light. That was the goal, I replied, heading for the kitchen. As I prepared the coffee, she wandered the space, Winston following at her heels. She didn't touch anything, just observed with a quiet appreciation. You have good taste, she said finally, accepting the mug I offered. Simple but not austere, it feels like a home, not a showpiece. Her assessment pleased me more than it should have. We took our coffee out to the deck. Our conversation flowed easily, from books we'd read to the best local hiking trails. She was an editor at a publishing house, working remotely most of the time. She was intelligent without being pretentious, funny without trying too hard, and possessed a calm centeredness I found increasingly attractive. She was nothing like Cordelia. Over the next several months, Audrey and I developed a friendship that grew organically, without pressure or expectation. Sometimes she'd stop by with Winston during her morning walks. Sometimes I'd invite her to dinner at the house, and she'd bring a homemade apple crumble for dessert. We talked about everything. I learned she had divorced amicably after 5 years. When she and her ex-husband realized they wanted different lives, he craved the academic prestige of the city, while she longed for space and quiet. In turn, I told her about my childhood, my determination to create financial stability, and eventually, about Cora. One evening, as we sat on the deck watching the sunset, she observed, "You never talk about what actually happened, the end of your marriage." I swirled the scotch in my glass. She had an affair with a younger man she worked with, I said, the words coming out easier than I expected. Used our joint savings to support him. Audrey winced. That's brutal. I'm sorry. It was a mercy, really, I said, surprised by my own honesty. It forced a clean break. The pain was more about pride than lost love. She studied me thoughtfully. After a quiet moment, she looked at me directly. Are you ready to move forward? She asked softly. I met her gaze, the setting sun reflecting in her warm, intelligent eyes. I'm beginning to think I am. Our friendship deepened into something more, slowly and deliberately. Both of us had lived through failed relationships and understood the value of building on solid ground. We dated properly. We took long walks with Winston along the lake shore, our conversations weaving a tapestry of shared thoughts and quiet understanding. When we finally slept together, 3 months after that sunset conversation, it felt less like a hurdle crossed and more like a natural, inevitable progression. Audrey spent more and more time at my house. A toothbrush appeared in the bathroom, then a drawer of her clothes, then her favorite books on the bedside table. My refrigerator, once a barren landscape of condiments and beer, began to contain fresh vegetables. The house, which I had built for myself, started to feel like a home for us. 1 year to the day after we first met on the dock, I asked her to marry me. There was no grand production, no expensive ring I'd spent months saving for. It was sunrise, and we were sitting on the deck with our coffee, just as we had that first morning. I love you, I said, my voice quiet but sure. I love the life we've built. I love who I am when I'm with you. Will you marry me? Tears welled in her eyes. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. Oh. We were married 2 months later in a small ceremony on the dock. Preston Shaw was there with his wife, beaming with an avuncular pride. Audrey's parents and sister stood beside her, their happiness for her evident. Winston served as the ring bearer, a simple velvet pouch tied around his neck. As we exchanged vows with the lake sparkling behind us, I felt a sense of profound rightness, a quiet joy that eclipsed any satisfaction I had ever derived from a rising stock price or a successful merger. Later that evening, as our small reception wound down, Audrey and I stood at the end of the dock, watching the sun dip below the trees. What are you thinking? She asked, leaning into my side. I'm thinking about that night 2 years ago, I replied, when Cora said, don't wait up, and I didn't. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway drew our attention. A sleek black BMW, painfully familiar, pulled to a stop. The driver's door opened, and Cordelia stepped out. She looked expensive. As always, designer sunglasses pushed atop perfectly styled hair, an outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. but there was a new tightness around her mouth, a forced quality to her confident posture. She faltered when she saw us, clearly not expecting to find me with someone else. Her eyes darted from me to Audrey, then to our intertwined hands with their matching simple gold bands. "Leland," she said, recovering quickly. "I was in the area for a client consultation. I heard you bought the lake house." I kept my arm around Audrey's waist, a steady, grounding presence. "Cora, this is my wife, Audrey." The two women assessed each other. It was Audrey who extended her hand first. "Nice to meet you. Leland's told me about you." Cora shook her hand briefly, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "Congratulations. I didn't realize you'd remarried." "2 months ago," I said. She looked past us at the house she had once imagined decorating, the house that was now ours. Through the great room windows, she could see our remaining guests mingling, the simple but elegant decorations, the evident happiness. Everything she had discarded for a fleeting affair. "No, thank you," she said finally, her voice thin. "I should get back to the city." She fumbled for words, something I'd rarely seen her do. "The house looks beautiful. You've done an amazing job with it." "Thank you," I said simply. She got back into her car and drove away. We watched until her taillights disappeared around the bend. "Are you okay?" Audrey asked, searching my face. I kissed her forehead. "Never better." As we walked back to our home, hand in hand, I realized Cora's appearance had been the perfect postscript to our wedding day. Not because it was a victory, but because seeing her had left me feeling absolutely nothing beyond a mild, distant curiosity. The pain, the anger, the sense of betrayal, it had all faded. The story was over. The page had been turned. The new chapter was well underway. Life settled into a rhythm I'd never imagined possible. 4 days a week, I worked in the city, staying at a small apartment near my office. 3 days a week, I was at the lake with Audrey. I learned to delegate more at work, to trust my team. I discovered that the world didn't end if I wasn't available 24/7. That balance wasn't just a buzzword, but an achievable reality. 6 months after our wedding, Audrey and I were having breakfast on the deck. The air was cool with the promise of autumn, and the lake was a sheet of dark, placid glass. She set down her coffee mug with an unusual solemnity. "I have news," she said, a small secret smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Good news, I hope." She took my hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "The best kind." My heart seemed to stop, then restart at double speed. My carefully ordered world tilted on its axis. "You're pregnant?" She nodded, her eyes shining. 8 weeks. I confirmed it with the doctor yesterday. And below. I pulled her into my arms, overwhelmed by a wave of joy so intense, it left me speechless. This house, this life, this love, it was all so much more than I had ever dared to calculate. This house, once the symbol of a failed dream, was now the foundation of a future I had never planned for. A family. "I love you," I whispered against her hair. "Both of you." "We love you too," she replied, her hand covering mine, where it still rested on her stomach. Later that day, while Audrey napped upstairs, I stood at the end of the dock, looking out over the water. My phone buzzed in my pocket. An email from Preston, a question about a client proposal. For the first time in my career, without a moment's hesitation, I silenced the device and left it in my pocket. The work would be there tomorrow. Today was for absorbing the quiet miracle of what my life had become. I thought about Cordelia's dismissive words that night long ago. "Don't wait up." How strange that those 4 words, meant to wound, had inadvertently set me on the path to where I stood now. Sometimes the end of one dream is just the beginning of a better one. Sometimes you need to know when to cut your losses. And sometimes, if you are very, very lucky, what you gain in return is beyond anything you could have ever calculated, projected, or planned for. As I turned to head back to the house, back to Audrey and our growing child, a deep sense of contentment settled over me. It wasn't the temporary satisfaction of a successful investment or a career achievement. It was the lasting peace that comes from building a life on solid ground, with someone who values what truly matters. It was the immeasurable return on an investment I never knew I was making, an investment in happiness itself.